Hello. Thank you so very much for making the choice to join us here at the Greenbrier Church Online. A few weeks ago, our oldest son, Trafton, was home, and we were talking as I was putting up some of our laundry. And he looked past me into my closet and saw this old sweatshirt hanging in the very back. He asked about it, so I took it out and handed it to him. And as he held it, he goes, "Dad, I really like this sweatshirt. This is really trendy." And I just kind of laughed and said, "Well, I bought it before you were born." He said, "Well, everything eventually comes back into style." And I guess he's right about that. Trends do tend to come and go, ideas come and go, styles, fads, they drift in and out. We live in a culture that's constantly changing, but even with all of the change that we experience on a weekly basis, there are a few things that remain constant. We all want to feel loved, we all want to feel cared about, and we all want to be successful. And while we have a general understanding of what it means to be loved, we have a general understanding of what it is to feel cared for. Defining success is a little more difficult. Last year alone, there were over 1 million books that were sold or downloaded, all dealing with the topic of how you can have a successful marriage, how you can be successful in business, how to live the successful life. There were over 100 books written last year alone with the intent of telling us how we can achieve more, how we can become more. There were that many, if not more, programs and conferences and lectureships and seminars, all centered around how we can be successful. But that kind of begs the question, how would you define success? What does it mean to live a successful life? I would imagine that if you ask 10 different people to define success, you are more than likely going to get 10 different answers. Some people would define success as financial security. Being successful means that I get to the point that I no longer have to worry about money or paying my bills or having enough money to afford the finer things in life. I have a friend who told me that for him, being successful is being airport famous. What he meant was it's one thing to be noticed and approached when you're at a conference in your area of expertise, but when people recognize you when you're just walking through the airport, well, that's a whole different level of success. Last week, we began a series that I'm calling Life Apps. It's a study through the book of James because I believe that James shows us how to live life in a way that's pleasing to God. Today we're at the end of chapter 1, and we want to see what James has to say about being successful. He writes in chapter 1, verse 19, "My dear brothers, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry." If you want to be successful in this life, James says it starts with the ability to listen. It's no great secret that everybody has this need to be heard. People that talk a whole lot and people that barely talk at all, every one of us want to be heard. But quite often, we don't do the best job listening. If you know me, then you know that Mondays have always been the day that I talk with my parents. I call them on the phone. I'm extremely protective about Monday mornings because those are the times that I can talk to my parents and catch up with what's going on in their lives and what needs that they're facing and what things have they accomplished. This last Monday, though, we were talking, and while we were talking, somebody texted me. They needed a file that I had. They wanted me to email it to them. And so while I was on the phone with my parents, I just sat down at the computer and I started looking for the file. And I have to admit that I have this bad habit of trying to do too many things at one time. I remember hearing my mom say, "And so, what do you think we should do about that?" And honestly, I didn't have any idea. I wasn't anticipating that part of the conversation to be the question and answer part of the conversation. So I had to apologize and tell her that I wasn't listening like I was supposed to, and she had to repeat herself. I know I'm not the only person who tries to multitask only to end up making somebody else feel unimportant because you didn't hear them. I'm sure there have been times that somebody's been talking to you and you've been nodding and smiling all the time. You're daydreaming. Your mind is thinking about supper or football or your kids. Or even worse, sometimes you're listening to somebody and you get fixated on some odd feature about them, like how their ears stick out or how their hairline isn't even. And you just stand there nodding, but you're not really listening. Or maybe you're one of those people that like to listen with your answer running. You know what that means, right? That means you're in a conversation with somebody and you don't really listen to what they're saying because you're so fixated on what you're going to say next. Really listening to somebody is difficult. It takes effort. It takes the want to have to listen. Daniel Goldberg wrote one time that learning to listen is the most important relational skill that you can learn. What really bonds two people together is when they feel that they're important enough to be heard. So, if you really want to be successful in this life, if you want to have friends, if you want to have influence, then exercise your ears. Learn to listen, to hear what's going on. If you want to be successful in your job, you want to be successful in your relationships, you have to learn how to not just hear what people are saying, but to listen and to understand what they're saying. The same is true with your relationship with God. If you want to have a successful relationship with God, you got to put forth the effort to listen to Him as well. You need to listen to what God has for us, how He wants us to love, to forgive, to accept, to uplift, to encourage. That's what the ultimate biblical wisdom is all about. You know that God talks to us through His written word. So if we're going to listen to God, then we have to actually spend time reading our Bibles, which means you need to find a translation that you understand. I was raised with some pretty poetic versions out there, but really, what good is poetry if you miss the point of what's being said? Right now, I have 43 different translations in English of the Bible. And every translation that I have has its merits and its flaws, its good points and its bad. And I still believe the best translation out there is the one that you will actually read. God speaks to us through events and circumstances in our lives. He places us in situations that He calls for us to trust Him and to follow where He's leading us. But unless we're listening to His voice, we'll never see what He's doing. The only way that we can hear the voice of God is to spend time in His Word, to get used to hearing His voice, to be able to pick out and to recognize His voice, to discern when He's the one who's actually speaking, which means we need to be willing to sit with the text. Because you can't read and understand the Bible if you're just trying to read to get through it. Ooh, I read the entire Bible in 6 months. I can check off that box. I think the Bible's written in a way that it invites us to read, to dwell, to think, to pray, to just sit with the text. Maybe what you need to do is take a passage and put it on your refrigerator or pin it up in the visor of your car or tape it to your bathroom mirror. And then just focus on that passage for a week or a month and then move on to the next one. We need to give the text time to sink into our lives and to make a difference. Because in order to actually hear God's voice, we need to take the time with the text so we can grasp how deep and how beautiful His words actually are. And once we've taken the time to listen, James says if you're going to be successful, then you got to slow down. You have to think before you speak. We've already read verse 19, but if we continue down in chapter 1, verse 26, James continues this idea. He says, if anyone considers himself righteous and yet does not keep a tight rein on his tongue, then he deceives himself, and his religion is worthless. Okay, I'm going to let you in on a little secret about me. I love to talk. I always have. Growing up, every semester, the report card would come home and say the exact same thing. Jeremy's a good kid. Jeremy's a bright kid. Jeremy talks all the time. We cannot get him to be quiet. One of the pitfalls of talking all the time is there have been lots of times that I have said something only to turn around and regret it later. Maybe you've had that experience. Maybe you've said something and immediately knew I'd have been a whole lot better off if I'd have been quiet. Solomon writes in Proverbs 17:28 that even a fool is thought wise if he keeps silent, and discerning if he holds his tongue. Holding our tongue is another way of saying you ought to be slow to speak because words are powerful. And we have to take our time to consider not only what we're saying, but does it really need to be said? Because I've heard people pop off in a situation and say some of the most hateful, racist, rude things, only to turn around and go, "I'm not really sure where that came from." The truth is, you actually believed what you said. You just didn't intend for everybody in the room to know that that's what you believed. Once again, Jesus says in Matthew 15, verse 18, "But the things that come out of the mouth come from the heart, and these defile you." The things you say, the words that come out of your mouth when you just pop off, they reveal the truth about what's happening in your heart. Your words always reveal your true character and your nature. Jesus says it's the words that tell the truth about who you actually are and the intent of your heart. That's why James says if you want to be successful, it's important to be slow to speak, especially when you want to pop off, because you're going to be held responsible for all of the words you say, even the words that you say in anger and frustration. Successful people understand that they're responsible for the words that come out of their mouth, despite of what else is happening at the time. So last week, I was in Walmart, had to be in there for whatever reason, and I overheard this little boy, he's probably about 7 years old, begging his mom for ice cream. And his mom said, "Sweetie, we have ice cream at home." And the little boy began to snarl up his face, and he clenched his fist and he screamed at her, "You make me so angry. I hate you." Now, regardless of your parenting style, every one of us know that that mom didn't really make that little boy angry. Anger is what we consider a secondary emotion. We choose to get angry because we're hungry, or we're frustrated, or we're bored, or like this little boy who chose to be angry because he didn't get his way. His words reveal his immaturity, his desire to be in control. And when he realized that he wasn't the greatest in the kingdom, he was rude and angry. The same is true for us. The reason we say rude and mean things to one another is because we've refused to get our attitudes in line with God. James is going to come back to this truth again and again. When we lie, when we gossip, when we're rude to one another, when we backbite, when we use obscenities, it doesn't really matter what you claim about Jesus. You're telling the truth of what your heart actually believes about Jesus, and that your heart is far from him. Paul reminds the Christians in Ephesus that some tongues just love the taste of gossip. Christians have better uses for language than that. You don't tell dirty stories, don't use foul talk or coarse jokes. That kind of talk doesn't fit our style. A Christian should only speak words of thanksgiving. James understands that you can't be quick tempered and quick to listen at the same time. We can't be quick tempered and slow to speak at the same time. If I'm a quick tempered person, then it shows that I'm not really willing to take the time to listen. If I'm quick tempered, then I will also be really quick to speak. If I turn on my tongue before I turn on my ears, then my anger flares up and, well, we all get in trouble. It's interesting that if we would be quick to hear and slow to speak, there would be less anger and there would be heartache in our churches, in our families, in our communities, in the world. If keyboard commandos on social media would actually take a moment to think before they shot off some snarky comment, the internet would be a whole lot nicer place. If we learned how to be quick to hear and slow to speak, we would automatically be slow to anger. James knows that when we practice being quick to listen, it often takes care of our speech. The truth is, when you say something, it matters. Jesus tells us that you must give an account on Judgment Day for every idle word that you speak. Being successful means that you have the ability to say only the words that build others up, especially when they need it the most. That way, your good words communicate grace to those that hear them. We need to acknowledge the truth that our words reveal what's actually happening in our heart, whether we recognize it or not. And allowing God to alter our attitudes will usually lead to a vocabulary adjustment. The third thing that James says in this text, if we want to be successful, we have to act on what we've heard. Well, that's verse 22, where he says, don't merely listen to the word and so deceive yourself. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but doesn't do what it says is like a man who looks at his face in the mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. Honestly, this could probably is my most favorite analogy in the entire Bible. I mean, we all get it. You go and you look at yourself in the mirror and you see all of your imperfections, your hair that needs to be combed, how you need to wash your face and brush your teeth. But once you turn away from the mirror, you forget all that. You forget everything that needs to be done. James says that's what happens when you read the Bible. You hear the teaching of God, and then you just refuse to do what you read. Have you ever heard of auditing a class? When I was in college, I wanted to take this class, but I'd already signed up for too many hours. My schedule was full. So I just went and asked the professor, would it be okay if I just sat in the back of the class and listened to the lectures? The professor agreed, and I would go to class. I didn't have to take any of the tests, I didn't have to write any of the papers, I didn't even have to show up if I didn't want to. It was by far the easiest class that I ever took because I was under no obligation to do anything. You can't audit your relationship with God. I've worked in churches for over 30 years, and sadly, I've known people who believe that you could come to church, sit on a pew, sing the songs, bow your heads during the prayer, take communion, hear a sermon, and walk out of the doors of the building with no intention whatsoever of allowing the Word of God to change their heart. And unfortunately, for years, that described me. I took notes, I wrote things down, I claimed to be a good person, but I really had no intention of applying the text to my life because I was better than my neighbor. James says that you're deceiving yourself if you don't allow the Word of God to change you. We think that just gaining all of this content is going to make us spiritually mature, but the test of maturity is not knowledge. The test of maturity is character. I mean, a lot of people accumulate Bible knowledge and they're still not successful in life because they're spiritually immature. A mature person is not the person that can quote the most Bible verses. The mature person is the one who has allowed the Bible to be applied in their life, to make changes in their life. I think in churches, a lot of times we get over focused on the water and we ignore the fruit. That seemed to be the problem of the Sadducees and the Pharisees. They bragged about the scripture that they memorized, the prayers that they offered, but in their life there was no love, no compassion, no grace, no mercy whatsoever. They kept taking in all of this water and they failed to produce any fruit. Knowledge increases responsibility. The more that you know, the more that you're going to be held accountable for. The more that you understand, the more that's going to be required of you. We're all going to have to give an account of what did we do with what we knew. In James chapter 4, James is going to write, to him who knows to do good and doesn't do it, it's sin. Knowledge without action is worthless, just like action without knowledge is worthless. Okay, think about it this way. Over the past 5 years, I've put on a little bit of weight. And so imagine that you came to me and you said, Jeremy, now that you're over 50, your age is beginning to show a little bit, but I love you and I want you to be healthy and I want you to stay around for a while. So I bought you a book. It's a gift. It's not just any book, it's Arnold Schwarzenegger's bodybuilding book. And I really believe that if you'll read through this book and do what the book says, it'll change your life. You'll get in better shape, you'll feel better, you won't have the aches and pains that you struggle with. And it's changed the lives of millions of people. And I look at you and I say, thank you so very much for loving me and for being concerned about me. Thank you for this beautiful gift. And I take it home. Now, after 6 months, you don't really see a change in my life. And you come back and you say, Jeremy, did you read the book? And I go, oh man, not only did I read the book, I have read that book several times. It's one of the greatest, most inspiring books that I have ever read. I love this book. I mean, I even have underlined portions of the book with colored markers. I've memorized sections of the book, and every night before I go to bed, I spend a couple hours just studying and reading the book. But if there's no change in my appearance, would you believe me? That was my attitude about the Bible for far too long. I grew up going to churches and sitting in buildings that gave out awards for memorizing verses. They praised people for knowing facts about Scripture. We had classes where we would sit down with markers and we would mark our Bibles. Yet it was all worthless because we never allowed the Bible to leave a mark in our lives. I don't really know that it matters how many times you've read the Bible from cover to cover. If it's not impacted your life, then it hasn't really done what it was supposed to do. You've got to be a doer of the word. I think sometimes we deceive ourselves because we know an awful lot of facts about Bible, because we can sit down and we never miss a question in Jeopardy on the Bible categories, that we're somehow mature, that we're successful. But knowing about weight doesn't produce muscles any more than knowing facts about Jesus makes me faithful. There's this great story about Mother Teresa. She's cleaning up the wounds of this person that has leprosy, and the person's dying. It's grotesque. There's this horrible stench and smell that just kind of lingers in the air. And a priest happened to walk by while she's taking care of this man with leprosy. And in a moment of authenticity, he said, "I don't think I could do that for $1 million." And Mother Teresa just simply smiled and said, "I couldn't do it for $1 million either, but I can do it for Jesus." If we're going to be a church of Christ, a church that is actually trying to live like Christ, we have to be people that allow the Bible to change our hearts. I think God calls us to talk less and do more, to let our actions speak louder than our words, to live in such a way that our acceptance, our humility, our grace, our forgiveness, our mercy, our hope, our love show the world who Christ is and how much He loves people and the difference that He wants to make in their lives. That's what God considers success, and that's what He's called us to. He desires for us to be successful in the only thing that matters, the only thing that lasts, and that's our relationship with Him. And that's what we get the opportunity to celebrate together this morning around the table.